Nick Dunn, you're probably the most hated man in America right now. Did you kill your wife, Nick?
Gone Girl to me is really, it's about a decaying marriage and the repercussions of what happens due to that decay. And then you've also got the whole sort of investigation on it as well, which I mean is kind of part of the mystery, but you're experiencing the mystery through the lead character and you're experiencing the mystery through the people trying to catch him. There's a lot of moving parts.
It feels like every single project that we work on, we always want to try to like push the envelope, whether it's a new technology or it's a new machine that we have, but we're always trying to find the best way of doing a movie.
Our mission on this particular job was to sort of carve out the future of how we're going to edit movies. And we saw an opportunity here to now try to integrate After Effects, which we had already been using, into our edit system. And by using After Effects and Premiere, people were connected on one system that we felt we had a future with.
The entire idea behind this production workflow was to bring VFX closer to editorial.
We now believe Nick is involved in the disappearance of our daughter.
Are you asking me if I killed my wife?
We shot Gone Girl on the Red Dragon, and we shot at 6K. David, for a long time, has wanted to shoot overscan, and we do that so that we have real estate around the frame to be able to manipulate the image. We've used that process on House of Cards and also on Social Network and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
David will tend to lock the camera off so that we have the ability to rip apart inside the frame using one performance from the back and a different performance from the front. You want to find a spot where people are going to play off each other without cutting. And again, reducing every bit of unnecessary screen time as you can. I think for an editor working, the interface of Premiere is like a 2-day event, maybe less, to get used to it and be efficient and speedy. I found it very flexible, and I could tailor it to things that I was used to and change a few things that I thought were better for me. That speed of finding multiple projects, multiple edits that weren't necessarily in the project that you had at the same time, that's something that Adobe aggressively chased for us. And now we're able to do that with much more efficiency.
When we were working in Premiere and we needed to make a split screen composite, or for instance, if there was a green screen monitor, we could simply right-click on a selection of clips or a single clip and send it to an After Effects comp. If Kirk was in the other room working in Premiere and asked me to open up that After Effects project, we could be working in 2 separate rooms.
I'll do the basic form, yell out to one of the editorial team to help, and then through After Effects, they'll clean it up, make it seamless, spotless.
And as soon as I saved that, it would be reflected in his timeline. It's something that you don't really get with any other nonlinear editing system.
The overall level of integration between Adobe Premiere and After Effects when working on such high-level gear is really quite astounding. What it means is that you can look at a frame and not have to wait many hours for an export to happen or to see another version of what would happen if we just changed that shot slightly. VFX at 6K is hard no matter what, and the HP Z820s allowed us to do that.
David has always wanted to move more and more of the work in-house. He likes to have things at his fingertips. On Gone Girl, instead of 2 or 3 shots a day, I'm getting 6, 8, even 10 shots a day.
In the past, we've always had all these visual effects shots done at these vendors all around the city and all around the country. Now we can just pass them on to this guy who's working on a station 50 feet from us.
I have the same sort of disease as Fincher, where I want everything to be done as soon as possible, straight away, so you're reacting and working with finished things, with stabilized shots, with effects already done. I mean, it's always about story. It's constantly about story. It is all about getting the movie moving at the pace that it works best. By bringing so much of the post here, it just brings speed and efficiency.
We all kind of like inherit this need for perfection from David.
We're always in track together, moving in the same direction.
It's always advancing. Every project we do has a new curveball that we have to solve.
Having this in-house means that we are not wasting any precious time. We can go to the very last minute and make all these little nuanced changes, or add a shot, or change a couple frames here and there. Everything is at our disposal, and it's all because of the technology that we're using here.
Without further ado, I want to introduce our esteemed panel here. These guys are my friends. We've been through a lot together, and thank you for doing this today. We really appreciate it. We have Peter Mavromates, second from the left. Peter is the post-production supervisor. He's a veteran in this industry. He's been with David for a very long time, and he's right-hand man to David and Sion. And none of what you saw is going to happen without Peter guiding the troops on this. Then we have our two-time Academy Award-winning editor, Kirk Baxter, over there at the end. Think you could figure out what he did? Pretty good job. We have Tyler Nelson, one of the assistant editors. And we'll get more into that later. But basically, I was trying to find, like, how long have we been doing this with you guys? And I dug up that email from 5 years ago. It was like the first introductory email to Tyler. And it was about getting him CS5, and maybe we'll check it out a little bit. And then Peter calls me up and says, Tyler's has conformed a short movie with After Effects. And I'm thinking, like, when did anybody ever do that? After Effects to conform a movie? And that was sort of the beginning of things. And 5 years later, here we are. Thank you, Tyler. You are really the heart of why this happened. And last, we have Jeff Brue, who is the post-production engineer on the film, who's also the founder of Open Drives, which we're going to talk about later. Jeff was literally the glue between Adobe and the post-production team. And I mean this from all my heart. Jeff, we could not have finished this movie without your help. We'll talk more about how Open Drives work closely with Adobe to make that happen. So I think here, let's... I want to start off with Peter. We were doing some promotional interviews because, that's what we do. And Peter said something really interesting during one of them that really stuck with me, because he was asked to talk about, what is his job? And he said, my job starts from the moment the light hits the sensor until the last post-deliverables are done. So I just thought that was great. I think there's a big question out there that I know I had it for a while, and of course it sunk in pretty quickly. Why 6K? What's that all about?
Because it's there, right?
Right.
6K, as we've all seen over the last 20 years, has been this long chase for resolution and more resolution. And we had 6K so that we could actually sort of overscan. We shoot 6K to extract 5K to finish in 4K, if that makes sense. So we have extra real estate to do all kinds of work, largely stabilization and repositioning. As far as I'm concerned, I think that the chase is almost over. I'm pretty happy with 6K. I think I've heard David say that he's ready to top out at 8K, because I think the next big battle is to get more bit depth, because that's when we do color correction and try to get stuff on these screens and make these screens consistent from theater to theater. I think that that's now where it starts to sort of fall apart a little bit, and I wish I had more bit depth to hold on to some highlights and lowlights.
I think out of the group here, you've probably been with David and Sion the longest.
Yep.
I know that, I remember cycling back with you on Fight Club when I was at DD, and you guys were doing that. It's just the thing that I see the most is how you work with David is just pretty incredible. Like the shorthand that you guys have. And, I know that to do this film, you've got something in place that uses the Pix daily system, and you're constantly reviewing things as soon as they're shot. And I was just wondering, between that and the Next Lab dailies, if you could just give the audience a little overview how that whole process works from the time dailies start coming in.
To give you an idea how far we've gone, the first movie I did with David was The Game, and The Game was acetate-based, although we did cut on video, but it was acetate-based, and we did have mag to screen dailies, double system, and obviously we don't do any of that anymore. What happens now, I mean, that meant going to a lab and then going to a telecine house and then going to videotape and then possibly striking DVDs or whatever. And now we've got it down to where we have a system, the Next Lab system that Mike referred to, and that system cranks out our edit media, cranks out Pix dailies, which is a web-based system that distributes dailies for us, among other things, which I'll talk about in a second. And it does our archives all in one place. So this whole process of going geographically to a lab and then to a telecine house and everything is all boiled down to this one rig that's actually, it's not on set. We don't do it on set. We keep it near production generally. And if we're shooting in town, it's actually in our edit room. The Pix system, a lot of people think of it as a daily system, but David uses it for a lot more than that. That's how he communicates with his entire crew. And Kirk here, by the end of the first week of shooting, has probably more notes than most people get in an entire production. And that's how ubiquitous it is for David to use the Pix system to feed notes to everybody. Everybody that's up here gets notes from David on Pix, and they're notes that are tied to specific shots and frames, and he draws on frames and has time code tag notes. And this starts from day one all the way to the very, very last day. So there are literally hundreds of thousands of notes from this man.
So speaking of notes, I got a taste of the production from the two halves of it. Like, what's it like when David's out shooting and watching you guys work, and then what it's like when he comes back. So Kirk, I'm just kind of interested in, from when the onslaught starts of those hours each day of those dailies and they're coming in through Pix, how do you and your lieutenants sort of begin to break that down, and how do you begin cutting things? Because I know he likes seeing it pretty much within a day or so.
Yeah, I've been saying for a while the assembly process, the time when David's filming, that's the hardest part, which is purely because of speed. Everything's required now, and I think it's the only time a cutting room has a ticking clock to it. So a lot of material comes in, and it's not just the sort of volume of takes, it's working out the mathematics of a movement within a scene, and it arrives every day. So it's not so much that David's saying, keep up, keep up. You just want to keep in front of it so that it's not burying you alive. So you end up, I think both David and Peter are excellent dads, because they give me enough room to sort of let me be, and I end up just whipping myself to death trying to keep up. No one's. I guess if someone's sort of like holding you by the throat, you'd probably resent the pace, but it's more self-interest and self-survival. So, but anyway, as it hits, I find David will shoot everything from, if it's a dialogue scene, he'll shoot it from start to finish. He won't break off lines for certain shots. He'll pretty much do everything from start to finish. And if it's in a close-up, we don't need it from start to finish. So we'll break everything into bite-sized chunks, and I'll repeat every take in a row. So if it's, what's a good line from That's Marriage? So it'll be that's marriage, that's marriage, that's marriage, that's marriage. And if you got all 8 of them together, it becomes very clear which one's the best one. So I end up sort of, dissecting them into those little pieces. In some cases, if it's a one-er, like, it's a walk and talk that's not going to have a lot of editing in it, then you've got to, pick a take for something, for 8 lines within it. So mostly in that sort of case, I'm probably going to be searching for dialogue and changing out just the dialogue performances. But generally, when you watch his films, there's a lot of editing, there's a lot of coverage, so you can dissect the material. So the best way to understand it is we break it down into bite-sized chunks. So I'll guess where I think the edit points will be just by marking little add edits, and then I'll pass that on to the guys, and the guys will break all those down, repeat them all out for me, hand them back, and then I'll go through and start selecting and raising everything up to the second layer of what I think is worthwhile. Then we'll build a sequence out of that. I'll review that again, reduce it some more, and that's usually a whole day's event, and then I'll spit it out on pics to David. I find if I send him something that's 20 minutes long, he won't comment on it. If I send him something that's about 8 minutes long, I'll get a lot of notes. So I know I've got to reduce it. I know what I'm aiming for. He's busy. He's doing it in between everything else while he's shooting. And then once the notes come in, then I start cutting it. If he doesn't take the bait and doesn't give me any feedback, then I'll just move on and cut it. And that's just the daily process. If I'm slow in doing it, they stack up on me. If I'm efficient in doing it, I get to see my kid.
Yeah. I think maybe what we'll do is we'll come back to part 2 when David comes back from shooting and he's in the building all day. And
yeah, I mean that's the most fun of it. I think filmmaking, it's this interactive part. It's like we're all, it's really enjoyable when it's bouncing back and forth. And David isn't one to sit in the room all day. I think it's sort of moving too slowly for him for that to happen. So he'll come in and he'll react to whatever I've been working on. He's extremely understanding of the process. He's never going to kind of go, why isn't this good yet? He's good at giving you broad notes when it's in its basic form, and then he gives very precise notes when you get closer. But that is the most enjoyable part when that interaction happens. That's why it's good to be editing in David's office, so he can kind of bounce in and out freely, and there's no scheduled time for David's coming at Mr. Fincher is arriving at 3:30. So you all get ready. It's more just, it's casual. It's like I'm editing in his living room.
By the way, the edit room is always in Hollywood at David's building, even when David's shooting out of the state. So this is where Pix becomes very valuable. We have never traveled the edit room with production. It's always been through Pix.
I know, and I remember when things were setting up and I started asking questions like, okay, so at the shoot, like where's the video village and how is Tyler going to get the material? And he was processing that, and the answer was, there is no video village like that. Tyler, you were at a hotel, like at a base camp, or?
Yeah, I was in Cape Girardeau where they were shooting, and we just had transpo vans come from set on either by daily basis or whenever we needed it, and I would receive it in this lovely conference room and be processing on Photochem's next lab.
Right. So I think, Tyler, this is going to be an interesting part for you here because Tyler is kind of the brains behind the workflow, and it's something that started years ago by only being able to use After Effects. So Premiere only came into the picture sort of on this film, but you were doing things that David needed done besides just conforming shots on Social Network and Dragon Tattoo with After Effects that really, to me, are the core behind the magic of what you're seeing today, because you don't see the things we're going to talk about, and that's what makes them incredible. So there's a shorthand that David uses with Tyler that is also highly integrated to the way Kirk is cutting with it, and it enables you to do all of these things, and changing a frame, changing synchronization between two actors, changing dialogue, speeding things up, pulling them away. So maybe you could talk about how that process begins, how you work with Kirk, because after the assemblies, you're now looking at shots and having to split them out and begin doing composites.
Well, Kirk is the one that's doing, splitting the performances. He's taking out the breaths and he's putting two performances of actor A and actor B closer together.
But I do it with a hacksaw though.
Yeah.
Right.
And then,
So the interesting thing here, watching these guys work, is this is something that is the core of the process where David will shoot about 18% wider when he's shooting at 6K. So when these guys are looking at the material, if this is the high-def 1920 1080 frame, there's about 2.3K around it all the time, that all they have to do is turn a knob and it'll move into position. So it's always there for their access. And I think that is just a core to the process, how that enables you to do all the other things that you do, right? Having all that extra image there. So maybe you could talk about the different treatments that are done using that extra image that now allow David to do, to achieve that goal.
Well, that shorthand that you're referring to is David writing on pics in all capitals, stabilize. And what that means is he just wants it to look as good as it possibly can be. And that could mean pinning down the shot so that it doesn't wiggle around as the camera operator is like moving with the actor or what he thinks the actor's movement is going to be. Or it could be as complicated as analyzing the whole image, taking that data that you've acquired and then manipulating it and making it as perfect as you possibly can. So it's kind of like a digital reanimation of the camera work. And we've been doing that since The Social Network. Where it has changed in our cutting room, especially with this movie in particular, is that we decided that we couldn't just crop out the dailies and scale this 6K image to 5K and then make 1080p dailies from that. We had to be able to use that 6K image and have it available in our offline so that basically, if we scaled that 6K down to 1080p, we would be looking at 20% black padding all around the image. But we had this ability with Premiere to actually scale it down to 2304 by 1152, which would reflect our center extraction, which was 5K, in a 1080p environment. So we actually could move around in Premiere up, down, left, right, and we would have all this wiggle room. What we also had the ability to do was tie in directly with After Effects and basically send directly to After Effects from Premiere and stabilize and have all that wiggle room. Or if Kirk was splitting up performances, we could do any significant compositing or green screen composites. We could do a lot of stuff, basically whatever After Effects is capable of doing inside Premiere. So when he's working, he just sends something to After Effects, yells at either me or one of the other assistants.
Yeah, literally 50 feet down the hallway.
Yeah.
And these are all alive at the same time, which is kind of the magic behind it.
But he can continue working while we're working in these very complicated After Effects comps.
Right. So
and it would just be reflected as soon as he pressed save and we press save.
So Kirk will get the timings that are just right, split screening, say, a performance, and then it goes off to you to finesse it. He may just do a hard line or, rough kind of cutout, and you guys.
A hacksaw, yeah.
Yeah, the hacksaw.
Yeah, and I want to do it with sort of speed to know. For me, it's all about timing all the performances so the actors are all sort of bouncing off each other at the speed that you want. So, for example, when it's the twins, when it's Go and Nick, like they're moving at a really rapid pace. Like they've got a different pace to anyone else in the movie, and if the actors aren't hitting that on the day, you kind of like boom, split it and pull it together, get it closer, and so they're always overlapping each other, so I'll do very kind of slashy comps and then go tight, and he'll neaten it all up and make, because if it's all sort of lumpy and crap, then you're noticing where the cuts are, or David's paying attention to that, and I want him to pay attention to the overall piece, the performance of it. I want him to, judge what a viewer's going to see, not, my shitty composition, But it's not just about stabilizing. I find I can go back to when we were doing Benjamin Button. I remember distinctly, I was just telling a gentleman outside that there was a take of Cate Blanchett walking into a room, and it was the best performance of hers, but the camera had got into the wrong spot for this one particular time, and it kind of cut off the top of her head, and it was unsalvageable. And I really wanted to use it, and I couldn't. And we had to use a different take, but it was all based on camera work, and it's wonderful if the choices are made based on performance. When you have this extra real estate, you just go whoop, and move it into place, and you keep going. It's really made things considerably better.
Yeah, I was listening to another interview that you did recently, and the whole thing about how David gives you the coverage to make the scene perfect. You have so many choices that he set you up for that you never, boxed into a corner. And, so obviously, if you're getting this, there's a flexibility to this process. And if you're familiar with other editing platforms, I'm not just saying this because, I'm with Adobe, but this can't be done any other way except using the tools that we have. So David's all about not a big separation between visual effects, opticals, green screens, and editing. What he's about is a fusion of them. And I think that that's really what came through in this process. It was a test. It was almost our test. Could we deliver this for you? Where there is now no hard line between those two crafts. And ultimately, the next thing for David is going to be doing color the same way, and we're working on a few things with that. We've got a pretty complicated workflow here in the sense that you guys shot multicam, right? How many cameras, Peter, typically on a shot?
Title would know better.
Normally 2. I think we maybe had a C camera at one point, but yeah, usually just two cameras.
Okay, so we have multicam shots on the timeline, and then we're not going to give out numbers here because that's a sort of tender little subject, but let's just say that a large amount of your timeline is involving a shot being touched by some type of optical or small visual effect or stabilization. So you start putting together that even for the offline edit, right, which was all done in Premiere Pro, these are ProRes 422 LT, is that correct? You start adding up what these guys are doing all at once and the fact that it has to perform flawlessly and not glitch and integrate all the updates from the visual effects work that are coming in minute by minute. You have to have an infrastructure in place that can handle this. And now, finally, we're going to talk a little bit about that because this is just a task where, I mean, you are the backbone of the operation here, where you had to set Peter up with a system that was going to be able to handle this. So tell us how you did that.
So first off, I definitely do have to say working with these guys have made me a better engineer, and I've really, on this project more than any other, pushed the level of design of technology. That being said, one of the earlier comments that Kirk made really...
Was it rude?
Yeah, no, it was quite nice, but I was going to agree with it.
But we haven't started with you yet. We're going to get to all of it.
The comment was giving you room to actually design and to iterate and to create things without the hand to the throat. And it's amazing when you're given that opportunity to actually do something like that and work with artists, you can actually design things that you never thought were possible. And OpenDrives and the entire company really has started, to actually enable that for what we define as our artists. What really came about inside of the design of the storage infrastructure and the ask was, how do we get so fast that we forget and just get lost in being creative? And I think that ultimately is what we tried to deliver. We literally live designed a storage system to make it so that when somebody hit render in After Effects, it would have no impact on whether or not they were editing full, 8 streams. And the other thing too that's unique to Premiere is that when it really goes out for the storage, in order to be able to ensure that it can render those After Effects comps in real time, those layers of color correction, is that it asks more from the storage system than pretty much any other editing or compositing application out there. Literally hundreds of megabytes a second to each individual workstation. And we had to deliver over 2.6 gigabytes a second at peak bandwidth times. But one of the most fun things about that is that then you get to see the results. Another particular instance was definitely getting the Premiere project load times down. I heard 2 very different questions at the start of production. One was whether or not we could do multi-project open.
Right.
But I heard something very, very different. I heard we need our projects to be able to open faster because it's inhibiting us and our creativity. And it was quite surprising. Over the course of the production, we actually managed, through a really tight collaboration with OpenDrives and Adobe, we managed to reduce our project load times by a factor of 10x. And that really meant that all of a sudden these guys could go in and look at their shots and see their projects. And that was really, really fun for me to see.
Let me humanize that for a second. So if If I'm, picture David and myself in the cutting room, we're working away, we've got 8 reels, we've got a 2-hour, 20-minute movie coming out of 500 hours of material, all at our fingertips. We're in reel 6, and we're going, oh, let's take a little look at that scene that's in reel 4. And I go, okay, great. I close it down, I go to open up reel 4, and it's 8 minutes to load. And that's like an 8-minute elevator ride where you're both going. I mean, we know each other, but there's the conversation flows better when we're talking about the work or interacting about the task. But when it's just kind of, is it up yet? Is it working? So that kind of got reduced down to, what was it in the end? It was
the original project load times were anywhere between 8 and 10 minutes, and they got reduced down to about a minute to a minute and a half.
Yeah,
Right, and
now,
once
I can
you-
have that conversation with them.
And once all the as things finish up, the After Effects comps are finally rendered in, and it could actually be even less of a load time. But a really great new feature that you guys are going to see in our release, coming out real soon, is Tyler and Jeff's suggestion. He's like, you got to do this render and replace thing. Like, make it so that if the After Effects comp is done, get it in there, but with low overhead. But give me the ability to always go back on it if I have to. You welcome me into your family. Was there quite a bit on and off. And every one of you has that story about when you work with David, how he makes you better and how he challenges you. So I just love talking about that because it's so personal to each of you. So going down the line, how does that work for you, Jeff?
Well, primarily, it's been a goal of Tyler's and mine, and we've known each other for years, and it's always been a goal of what happens when you collapse visual effects into editorial, and what happens when you can really think about the creative decision in the shot instead of worrying about how many megabytes a second you're playing back. And I think that particularly for me, and definitely for Open, has been about that moment when you're seeing it interfere and technology interfere with people that you very, very much want to enable. And then you go stay up all night, and you get all your guys in your company to stay up all night to make sure that the following morning they can work and they can go back to being creative. And I think that's definitely what happened here.
Tyler?
I can't remember exactly when it was, but I remember I was at the office late one night and David was looking for Kirk, but Kirk was somewhere else. And he stopped in my office and said, hey, what are you working on? And I explained what I was working on to him, and he's like, when's it going to be done? He's like, I said, I'm still working on it. He's like, well, make it perfect, then we'll go from there. I've kind of kept that mentality.
That's his screensaver.
That's my background, and it has been for several years now. But it's been my mentality working with Fincher and all these people for many years, and it's kind of like seeped into wanting to be so in control of the final picture as much as I can, and that's what led me to wanting to conform an entire movie using After Effects twice, and then needing to relinquish that control when we worked on House of Cards, but kind of taking it back a little bit on Gone Girl, but just changing my mentality every time and hopefully making it better each and every time. But one of the best parts about working in this environment is Jeff said it about making him a better engineer. I think we're trying to be a better blank every time that we're working with David. We're always wanting to put on a new hat and be as best as we can. And we have this really great team of people, and they're all working within a 100-foot radius of where Kirk is sitting. And each and every person wants to make the movie as best as they can possibly be, from editor to assistant to visual effects compositor. Everybody is so invested in the product.
And I think it kind of shows up there.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say it shines through. I mean, this is what makes the movie you saw what it is. Peter, you've been with these guys the longest. I spent so many hours just, it was lots of time in between things, just sharing our stories and things like that. So where does this focus for you?
One of the great things about working with David, and I spotted this early on, is that it's easy to ask him, when he asks you for something, it's easy to ask him why. And this is where the sort of the leadership and this team and everything really learns from him, is that you ask, he's never asking for something and then giving you the answers because, he always has an answer that's 4 or 5 layers deep. And what's great about that is that now once you've got that answer, you actually have the tools to go off and execute this for him because you know why he's asking for it, from what perspective, what are the priorities. And then the next time that comes up, you don't have to ask him because now he's filled in all the details for you. This is, to me, what separates my experience with him compared to a lot of other people I've worked with, is that I don't always necessarily agree with all the choices he's making, but as long as I know why he's making them, it's easy to go out and execute for him. When we use picks, one of the ways that we work on color correction, believe it or not, is David's not sitting in the DI suite most of the time. He's actually marking up a picks clip. And the colorists love it because David's leaving a note there, and the note isn't, I don't like this. The note is, this face doesn't match the cut 2 shots ago. They're very specific notes. And so once we get that first round out there and these colorists get these notes, it's pretty much just check it off. It's very, very specific what he's asking people to do.
So Kirk, one thing I enjoyed the most is, sometimes the engineers had to be in the room to take a look at a thing or two, and had the privilege of just being a fly on the wall and watching your shorthand with David. So maybe talk a little bit about that, because it's just...
I think there's an idea of who David is from afar, and he's a very different person when you're interacting with him. He's very funny, very charming. He's good company, and he's clever. I think that the main thing that's different, when I first spent a bunch of time with him, it was probably going back to Zodiac, I remember thinking, oh, I know how to do this now. Like, I've learnt this new tool set, and I'll apply this to other things that I do as an editor. And it's mostly, it's easier, you can relax when you trust the person that's leading. And you don't have to come at things from a defensive standpoint. And I found so much of my early years, and definitely pretty much all of my 20s, making things, was defending them. And it's really dull, and it's tiring. So after I kind of first worked with David, it's okay not to, I don't so much as save edits. It's like, well, let's dig into this, and you just keep working. You don't have to kind of go 10 back thinking, all right, let these people play, and then we'll show them the one that was correct. Like, you're always moving forward in the right direction. But it was shocking me thinking that I'd got this new tool set, and I went to apply it to other people, and it doesn't work. Because some people need to be told what to do. And I find a lot of the time when I work in the commercial arena, you've got to steer, and you've got to kind of, if you leave people with their own devices, they spin and spin and spin and worry. But it's, with David, you don't have to steer him. You just hang back and enjoy, and it refines, and it just sharpens and sharpens and sharpens. It's a joy. I find the process so easy. It's challenging, but it's easy because it's always making sense. And you can get yourself out of that environment into other ones, and it gets infuriating because everything's hard. But it's not when we're doing the movies. They're exhausting because they take so long. So I find at the end of them, you're kind of going, oh, thank fuck, it's over. And then when the next one's sort of beginning, you're like, you can't wait to get in there again. So
basically, the decision to use Premiere Pro, Peter, that was really in your hands with Tyler, sort of. And then there's Kirk, who got told, we're going to use Premiere Pro on this movie.
He was involved with the decision. Yeah. It wasn't dictatorial necessarily.
No, it was everyone. It was, those, when people deliver those sentences to you going, it's funny, right?
Yeah.
But it was more
Like
like
my
that.
jokes, you mean?
Yeah, it's hard to, yeah, it was pretty much everyone going, we should do it with Premiere Pro, right? So I'm like, right.
What were you? Well, you've edited on Avid, but for the last few pictures you did before this, they were Final Cut, right?
Yeah. I don't know. When I master this particular topic, I find that, I think I've said it in the past, I'm the easiest one to please because I do view myself as the finger painter. What everybody else is doing has much more depth to it in terms of technically. I'm just trying to, pick things, move quickly, get the shape of it. It's not, the technology of it, I'm very guilty of ignoring, and I'm only able to do that because everybody else around me is paying attention. That's the way I've always been, and I'll continue to do it as long as I get away with it.
You did an interview recently where it said something that really struck me, how you build up tension and how that worked. And you used the metaphor that the first 40 minutes are like pulling back a slingshot and then boom. So maybe talk a little bit about that, because I know it's part of the process that had to happen for this movie, the way the setup is.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that stuff you're not too aware of it at first because you're just working within scenes. I mean, David has a tendency to be 3 steps ahead of me, but I'm always worried about, I think because it's so thought out, like he will go out and get you all the material that's needed and the script's been vetted, and it's like he's gone through the process properly. So by the time it reaches me, so much of what my job is craft, and it's just trying to apply the craft to it within the individual scenes. And once it's assembled, then you step back and you kind of go, all right, what's this movie? And it's not until you sort of watch it as a whole do you start becoming an audience member, and you can kind of let go of your individual nuances, things that you're sort of fretting and frowning about. But I distinctly remember the first time we watched it, it was only about 6 of us, and we knew that we had to race to either, it was 2 points. We had to speed ourselves along until we got to the vigil. So we knew that we were looking always for ways to extract time. And that's the game with David. It's extracting time without losing content, which is why there's so many splits and why there's so much. And he gives you all the shots so that you can manipulate and really get in there and rip it all apart. You're not tied to one take that takes forever. You can get in there and move and control the pace. So the first sort of 40 minutes of it, probably when we watched it, was the first 50 minutes of it, but it ended up having to be the first 40 minutes of it was doing that. And then, the moment all those storylines converge, which was the hardest scene in the movie to cut, when he works it out to go to the woodshed, and they all kind of go crash, and we dip to black, and now, Amy, I'm so much happier now that I'm dead, that's the release. And then, boom, the whole movie just starts flying. But it's teasing up to that point. And we were really conscious that if you teased too long, it felt slow. So I don't know, I hope we got the balance.
Well, I thought it worked great.
I would love to watch it for the first time. I mean, that would be the greatest gift of all. The gift we get now is I came in with the last sort of 30 minutes, and every time you hear someone go, or someone laugh, like there was some dude about 5 rows back over there that was laughing his head off, and I just wanted to hug him.
So speaking of things that require all that thought, that are challenging, I kind of wanted to take it again and go through the panel. What was the most challenging aspect of the movie?
It was actually a pretty easy ride, because a lot of the things that I had been hoping for, as far as like what would make all of our jobs easier, were part of like the After Effects integration. But I really think the most challenging aspect was trying to figure out how to steer the Premiere ship in a direction that would be beneficial for our show and also the shows in the future, like any show that tackles a movie using Premiere Pro. But just working with the Adobe Premiere team, I think conveying that information, just like having that open dialogue and saying, this is why we need this is why we need this. And I think we've made a pretty great product, and I think hopefully they're going to make it better.
So just in the creative process of shaping performances, How would you say you divvy your time at the end? How much time is spent on that with David across the last half of your time together?
It's constant. It begins from the second day of shooting when I start cutting, and it goes until the very end of the movie. And this lends to what I was saying before of not holding on to things. Like, everything is up for grabs at all times. So, you know, a performance that you've been in love with forever might get changed 2 days before you lock. And then a performance that I adored, when I sit and watch it at Skywalker to go up and look at the mix, it's been changed with an ADR line. Like, it's constantly changing. And yeah, it's never, I mean, I think it's part of, because we're working so rapidly whilst he's shooting, within a week at the end of the shoot, about a week after that, we have like an assembled film, probably maybe 2 weeks after that. So instead of trying to build a movie, it becomes, you know, 3-4 months of polishing. So the crafting of a performance never ends.
You had a great tech crew to help you through this, Kurt, but it's always difficult for an editor who's used to working on one system to move to another. What was your kind of learning curve on this, you know, to the point where you started feeling really comfortable not having to think about what you were doing?
A Calvin Klein commercial. It was, David shot a Calvin Klein commercial, and that was their first sort of leap-off test, and we did it with that. And most of it is, I was fine within a couple of days. There's muscle memory where you sort of hit the wrong keys, and it's irritating, and then eventually after 2 or 3 days, you don't.
When you look at the whole movie, do you get a sense that, you know, there are 800 places where you were able to do something that was just slightly better because you had access to the frame, or because you could look at it faster or something like that? That's
oh my God! If you look at it in terms of before one was capable of doing split screens and stabilizing images and doing that, then I think the movie's like 50% better than it could have been. Yeah, I mean it's a huge radical difference. But I thought the question was more based on a day-to-day speed. It just means you get to go home earlier. But
that's good.
Was there ever anyone during the process that sort of regretted going to Adobe Premiere and the software? Was there anybody saying, "Oh, wish we could go back to the other stuff we used before"? And my second question, is this software capable of being used also for more action-oriented movies?
In terms of the regret, I don't know that there was some person, but I think there are a few other companies that regretted that.
I mean, there was a teething process in the beginning, and I usually had sort of sharp words surrounding Mike's name for a few months, but not towards the end. And then, I don't know, I think...
You said it was working like butter in the last interview you did. So that was good. Better than the start.
Yeah, no, it's, whether it's an action film or not, you know, once Amy is sort of going through all of her, you know, the cool girl sequence, in some ways would call that an action sequence. It's got 200 setups and it races through and non-stop for 7 or 8 minutes, and it's really rapid. The big bloody scene, I would call that an action scene. So I've found any platform I've worked on doesn't dictate for one or the other.
I was wondering, the music or the sound design plays a very prominent role in how you perceive people's minds. How was this in the editorial already present, or is this something that was created later, or did you react to it when there was music made?
No, yeah, this is one of the greatest gifts in the last 3 films working is Trent and Atticus, the musicians. They tend to, early on, whilst we haven't got to the end, whilst we're filming, they'll come and sort of see something early, a really rough assembly that's still got black holes with scenes that are missing, and then they'll go off and they'll compose an album based on the vibe. And it is so helpful. It is the Christmas Day times 10 when that arrives. because they'll give us 12 tracks, and they're loose about it, and they're not, you know, nervous or controlling, or this one's supposed to go here, and there's nothing exacting about it, and it's really freeing when it's that way. And David will, like, from the moment they upload it, this is what I find he's amazing. Like, if I upload an edit sequence to David, he's making comments on it usually within 10 minutes. And it's the same thing with the music. The musical hits, I've been waiting for it for 3 months. It's the main thing I want in the world. And before I play it, David's gone, this one could be good for the opening track, and this one could be, or there's all these, so I immediately sort of like follow what his first direction was, but then you've just got the freedom to start moving things around. And then a few months later, they give me another album with another sort of 12 tracks. And then Ren Kleiss gets heavily involved, the sound designer, in the placement of those. And Trent and Atticus will, once we sort of lock into place, will refine those tracks and really glue them into the picture. But I resist. Before we were working with them, we used to do temp music and just pull from CDs and other movies and all that sort of thing. And in this case, I'll work dry until their music comes, because I love only knowing it as their world. And it changes everything. As soon as you've got themes for certain people, it's, I don't know, everything gets better as soon as their music's involved.
Hi, I just wanted to ask if any of you could speak about the very simple, very kind of subtly creepy opening titles, how they kind of come alive and then just die at the end of every shot. I thought it was really, really simple. And
The
really
title
effective.
design?
Yeah, just the design and the way they came in. It looked like it was done incredibly simply. Was it?
Yeah, it was. What's his name?
Neil Kellerhouse.
Yeah.
Who's been working with David for recent movies and does all things graphics for publicity and everything. That's Neil's handiwork. And yeah, it was fairly simple.
Yeah, David wanted to be as fast as possible, the shots. So when we first cut that scene, it was the very first thing that David shot. It was all those before the actors arrived, and it was almost his test, getting everything, the gear all set up. And it was cut together to this piece of music that he threw me reference to that had a really fast tempo to it. And then that's the only time I dropped any kind of bit of, you know, music that wasn't Trent and Atticus's onto it. And then we pulled that out and we put this very languid piece of music that's there now, but this pace stayed. And I always loved that. And I spoke about this recently, but it makes me wonder if I was always doing it with the languid music, would the shots have been slower? But I was, I think, very fortunate the way that sort of went around. And it does speak to David as well with, if they're credits, like he's not a backslapper, even for himself more so than everybody else. But he wants to just race that through. He wants to kind of go, credits, how fast can we legally do it?
In this film, you were extracting a 5K. Were you providing the colorist a 4K image at the end of the day after the comp was done, 16-bit TPX, or were you giving them the R3Ds and giving them notes? And also, a second question, because Premiere and After Effects and SpeedGrade can support the native R3D red files, do you see a moment where you're going to be working away from proxies and editing more and more natively with the higher resolution files?
We delivered 6K to the colorist, so we had that extra real estate all the way into DI. We also delivered the R3D files there in case we ever needed to rebake something. Tyler, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, sure. So, to like what Peter was saying, we delivered 6K 10-bit DPX image sequences to our DI facility, and we transcoded everything at Red Color 3, Red Log Film. And we did a bunch of tests beforehand to see if there was a viability of using 16-bit EXRs or 16-bit TIFFs, and we just felt that 10-bit DPX still gave us exactly what we needed. So we didn't need to transcode everything at this very, very heavy file size and then send it on to them, because it would just be wasted. Because we're dealing with like a difference in an extra third of the storage. So even though we want to support Jeff's business, we don't want to deal with that. In regards to going to edit with R3Ds natively, that would be very, very interesting. But I'm like, just because it's very, we have the ability to. However, I don't think there's a reason right now not to use proxies. It's so easy to transfer information to a DI facility with AAFs and XMLs. Basically, everything you do in the offline should translate pretty directly. And if you want to finish something yourself, then you can always relink to the R3D files.
We're working so much early in the process with effects companies and everything like that, that doesn't really, it's not practical unless all those companies work R3D based. So DPX is a common language. We can go anywhere with that.
I'll add in one last thing. No matter what, the second that you go to a larger data size, you're dealing with a much higher latency for editorial. So it really, we've had it. OpenDrive has had other shows cut R3D in crazy specifications. But really, just even watching how these guys interact with the edit, a half a frame of latency makes all the difference in the world. So that's one of the reasons to continue, and I think we're going to continue cutting proxies.
Thank you, everybody. What a great afternoon. Thank you, guys.